Hey, this is again, and this is my sheep brain dissection. So, there are meninges which cover the brain. There are three types of meninges. The dura mater, which is the thick outermost layer, which was previously removed before it got the brain. There's the arachnoid and the pia mater, which is you can see on this side of the cerebrum, which is a thin membrane, which is this whitish color. And then you can see on the left hemisphere it's not there because I removed it. Okay, so this part of the brain is the cerebrum. There's two hemispheres, the left hemisphere, which is right here, and the right hemisphere. The hemispheres are divided by the longitudinal fissure. Around the outside of the cerebrum is the cortex. On the cortex here, you can see the gyri, which are the folds in the brain, which increase the brain surface area. And then you can see the folds around the gyri, which are the sulci. Okay, so on the front part of the cerebrum, you can see the frontal lobe. And the frontal lobe controls motor function. So this is the frontal lobe. Next is the parietal lobe, which is behind the frontal lobe, which is right here. The parietal lobe receives and processes sensory somatic information. So it's right here. Behind the occipital, this lobe receives and processes visual information. So this is the occipital lobe. On the sides of the brain, we can see the temporal lobe, which is like right here. And the temporal lobe receives and processes hearing information, which is also auditory information. Okay, the next part of the brain right here is the cerebellum. And the cerebellum's function is to control balance and coordination. So we're going to flip to the inferior side of the brain, which you can see the spinal cord right here and the brainstem. This is the brainstem. And the brainstem contains the medulla, which is like right here, this area, the pons, and then the midbrain. So here we can see the mammillary body, and just above it, this darker space right here, we can see the infundibulum. Okay, so the optic chiasma is located right here, and this is where the optic nerves cross. Normally it's an X shape, but part of it has been removed. So you can just see the optic chiasma right here. Okay, so the olfactory bulbs come, and so they're about right here, which I believe they've been removed too. And their function is they have cell bodies that make up neurons that synapses with olfactory neurons. And the olfactory bulb, it is where your sense of smell comes from. So, the olfactory bulb and the optic nerve are all part of the 12 cranial nerves, and a lot of them you can't really see on this brain very well, but they come from like the remaining lower part of like the brainstem, but we can't really see them. So moving on, we're going to the sagittal view. The sagittal view of the brain. So we're going to open it up here. So we can see the spinal cord, the inner part of the spinal cord here. And then the connected part is the medulla oblongata, which is right here. And the medulla oblongata contains the control centers that regulate blood pressure, heart rate, and respiration. It also has reflex centers, which control things like sneezing and coughing. Connected to the medulla oblongata is right here, and that is the pons. The pons contain nerve tracts, and it connects the cerebellum to the spinal cord and other parts of the brain. So moving on from the pons, you can see the midbrain, which connects to the dicephaloid. The dicephaloid is made up of two parts. It has the thalamus and the hypothalamus. So this is the thalamus, and the thalamus is a relay center where sensory information comes, and then the sensory information then goes so then its impulses go to different areas in the cerebrum where it's supposed to go. So inferior to the thalamus is the hypothalamus, which is like right here, and the hypothalamus contains and controls internal homeostasis. And it does that by regulating body temp and balancing like the fluids in our body. So normally inferior to the hypothalamus is the the hypophysis, which is a pituitary gland, which should be in this location, and it controls endocrine glands. So it should be located right here, inferior to the hypothalamus. Moving on, we have the ventricular system. So it contains 4 different ventricles, and all the ventricles contain cerebral spinal fluid. So first we're going to do the lateral ventricle, which is right here. And then we're going to go to the third ventricle, which is right here. And on the roof of ventricles is the coronoid plexus. And the coronoid plexus produces cerebral spinal fluid. And the coronoid plexus is kind of located right in this area of the third ventricle. So moving on, we have the cerebral aqueduct, which connects the third and the fourth ventricle. So moving on to the fourth ventricle, we can see that the fourth ventricle is right here. So around the lateral ventricle is the corpus callosum, which is made up of nerve tissue, and it's this thick thing right here. Oh, also the corpus callosum connects the left and right hemispheres together. So next we're going to talk about the hippocampus. So here's the lateral ventricle, like I've said, and the hippocampus is located under the lateral ventricle. And the hippocampus is responsible for things like emotion and converting short-term memory into long-term memory. The pineal gland is located right here, the pineal body. And the pineal body is an endocrine gland, and it secretes melatonin. So here it is. The superior colliculus is right here, and then it also is the inferior colliculus. So the brain has white matter and gray matter. White matter is made up of myelinated axons, and you can find white matter like in the cerebrum, like right here, and on the outside of the spinal cord. So gray matter is made up of cell bodies, dendrites, and unmyelinated axons. And gray matter can be found on the outside of the cerebrum. See this darker area?